Welcome to This Explainer, everyone. If you've been noticing more people sneezing, rubbing their eyes, or just complaining about being perpetually congested lately, well, you're absolutely not imagining things. The global prevalence of allergies is rising at a staggering rate. For millions of us, just the changing of the seasons, or honestly, even just sitting on a slightly dusty couch can trigger a totally miserable cascade of symptoms. So today, we're going to look way beyond the standard over-the-counter antihistamines. We're exploring a step-by-step, evidence-based, natural path to relief. We're going to dive into an integrative approach to managing what the medical community calls allergic rhinitis.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a really logical 5-step roadmap for today's explainer. First, the allergic cascade. Second, controlling your environment. Third, mechanical relief. Fourth, botanicals and probiotics. And finally, safety, interactions, and myths.
Section 1. The allergic cascade explained. The why behind the misery. Before we can actually find relief, we have to understand the molecular mechanisms that drive allergic inflammation in the first place. Let's pop the hood on your immune system, shall we?
It all starts with a really fundamental question. What exactly is an allergy? Well, at its absolute core, an allergy is basically a case of mistaken identity. It's what happens when your immune system bumps into a completely harmless environmental trigger, like tree pollen or pet dander, and just totally overreacts, treating it like it's some sort of dangerous invader.
Clinically speaking, this is known as a type 1 hypersensitivity reaction. Here's how this allergic cascade actually plays out. Upon your very first exposure to an allergen, if you're an atopic individual, your immune system churns out specific antibodies called IgE. Think of these IgE molecules as little scouts that attach themselves to your mast cells. Then, when you're re-exposed to that exact same allergen later on, it binds right to those IgE antibodies. This causes the mast cells to degranulate, which is just a fancy way of saying they essentially burst open. This releases a massive flood of chemical mediators, the most famous one being histamine. And it's that sudden rush of histamine that causes the vasodilation, the swelling, and that intense, maddening itchiness that makes allergies so unbearable.
Moving right along to Section 2, controlling your environment, the first tier of defense. Now that we know what's happening on the inside, let's build the foundation of our healing hierarchy. The primary goal here is incredibly simple. Lower your total allergic load. Try to picture your body's tolerance like a bucket. If you can just reduce the amount of allergens constantly pouring in, your bucket won't overflow into a full-blown symptomatic reaction.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the incredible precision of these mitigation techniques. Take tree pollen, for example. It specifically peaks in the early morning, right between 5 a.m. and 10 a.m. So just by shifting your daily run to the late afternoon, you can drastically cut down your exposure. And what about indoor allergens like dust mites? They absolutely love bedding, but washing your sheets in warm water? Yeah, that's not going to cut it. Clinical data actually shows you need water at exactly 130 degrees Fahrenheit to wipe them out effectively.
Beyond that, making simple behavioral adjustments can be highly effective. For instance, keeping your indoor humidity between 40% and 50% literally starves dust mites and mold of the moisture they desperately need to survive. It's like turning off their life support. Also, taking a quick shower right before bed is a total game changer. It ensures you aren't transferring all that sticky pollen from your hair right onto your pillow. And don't forget about true HEPA filters. These things are amazing. They trap an incredible 99.97% of airborne particles as tiny as 0.3 microns. That pulls the triggers out of the air before they ever even reach your nose.
All right, Section 3, mechanical and physical relief, clearing the airways. Once your environment is dialed in, we step up to the second tier of our hierarchy. This is all about the physical removal of whatever allergens did manage to sneak into your nasal mucosa. And the absolute gold standard here, saline irrigation. Basically, rinsing your sinuses physically flushes out the pollen, the dust, and the built-up mucus, all while actually improving the function of your nasal cilia. So the crucial point is this. You absolutely must follow strict FDA rules for the water you use. You can safely use distilled water straight from the bottle, commercially prepared sterile water, or just regular tap water that you've boiled for 3 to 5 minutes and let cool down to lukewarm. But you must never, ever use untreated tap water for nasal irrigation. It's rare, but untreated tap water can sometimes harbor dangerous organisms, like the amoeba Naegleria fowleri, which can cause literally fatal brain infections if it gets deep into your nasal passages. Definitely not something to mess around with. Let's push forward to Section 4, botanicals and probiotics, internal defense. With our environment locked down and our airways physically cleared, we hit the third tier. We're going to explore what the clinical science actually says about targeted botanical supplements, as well as this really exciting emerging frontier called the gut-nose axis.
Let's kick things off with bromelain. It's this fascinating proteolytic enzyme that's extracted from pineapples, and this brilliantly illustrates its power. Just look at the stark difference in this data. In a clinical study looking specifically at nasal inflammation, a stunning 85% of subjects treated with bromelain experienced complete relief. Compare that to just 40% in the placebo group. It works because it literally breaks down the proteins in inflamed tissues, which thins out the mucus and stops those pro-inflammatory prostaglandins right in their tracks.
And the evidence totally holds up in pediatric care, too. A clinical trial over in Germany looked at kids under 11 who were diagnosed with acute sinusitis. The data showed a significantly faster recovery time for the children taking just bromelain, averaging about 6.66 days compared to almost 8 days, 7.95 days to be exact, for the kids on standard therapy. That statistically significant drop is solid proof of its mucolytic and anti-inflammatory properties. Now, two other botanicals that get a lot of research attention are quercetin and butterbur. Quercetin is a flavonoid you can find in everyday foods like red onions and apples. It acts as a mast cell stabilizer. It basically reinforces the cell membrane so it doesn't leak out all that histamine. But the key takeaway you need to remember here is that quercetin's effects are cumulative. It works best when you take it consistently, for weeks before pollen season even begins. Butterbur, on the flip side, directly targets COX-2 enzymes, lowering the production of the inflammatory leukotrienes that cause your airways to constrict.
Okay, let's move to and see how this builds into the broader immune system through what's known as the gut-nose axis. Recent meta-analyses are highlighting how balancing your gut microbiome can actually shift your immune system away from that allergic Th2 response. Specific multi-strain probiotics are showing incredibly high clinical efficacy rankings. For instance, a combination of B. longum, B. infantis, and B. breve hit a massive 96.9% efficacy ranking for reducing total symptom scores. Meanwhile, the LP33 strain of L. pericaceae scored a 91.8% efficacy for directly improving patients' quality of life. It turns out healing the gut has a profound, measurable impact on the nose. Aromatic medicine also steps in here to provide some really valuable complementary support. Essential oils like eucalyptus, which contains the active compound 1.8-cineol, can significantly reduce congestion and increase mucociliary clearance. Peppermint gives off a natural cooling menthol effect and reduces IL-8 cytokines, while lavender brings natural anti-inflammatory properties to the table. But please listen closely because the safety protocols are absolutely strict here. Essential oils must always be diluted in a carrier oil if you're putting them on your skin. Plus, they should be totally avoided in infants. And if you have a reactive airway disease like asthma, you've got to exercise extreme caution because strong aromatics can actually trigger spasms in some cases.
Which perfectly tees up Section 5, Safety, Interactions, and Myths. Natural doesn't mean safe. This brings us to the real climax of our explainer. We need to transition our focus to objectively debunking some popular myths and explaining some critical drug-herb interactions. Because as we'll see, just because something is natural absolutely does not mean it's 100% safe. Let's start by impartially breaking down the scientific flaws of the famous local honey hypothesis. We've all heard this folk myth, right? That eating local honey acts as a sort of oral immunotherapy, naturally desensitizing you to local pollen. Well, sorry to burst your bubble, but the immunology just doesn't match up. You see, bees collect heavy, sticky pollen from big, bright flowers. But the pollens that actually cause your seasonal allergic rhinitis, those are the lightweight, wind-borne pollens from trees, grasses, and weeds. Honeybees just don't collect those. In fact, clinical trials clearly demonstrate that there's zero symptom difference between patients eating local honey and those given a honey-flavored placebo. Sure, it might soothe a scratchy throat, but it definitely won't cure your hay fever. Now, looking closely at the clinical risks, it really enforces the narrative that natural herbs require the exact same respect we give to pharmaceuticals. Just take a look at this. Quercetin can significantly alter blood levels of certain medications. Specifically, it increases the bleeding risk for folks on blood thinners like warfarin. Bromelain can actually boost the absorption of antibiotics like amoxicillin, which raises your risk of toxicity. And butterbur? That is completely contraindicated for patients taking anticholinergic medications. This right here is exactly why professional medical oversight is absolutely vital when you're integrating these supplements into your routine. Furthermore, the safety of the herbs themselves can vary wildly by formulation.
I want to read this stark warning directly from the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health regarding butterbur. Quote, raw butterbur extracts contain pyrrolizidine alkaloids, which can cause liver damage and cancer. Extracts of butterbur that are almost completely free from these alkaloids are available. End quote. This just reinforces the absolute necessity of being a highly informed consumer. If you do utilize butterbur, you must make sure you're only purchasing certified PA-free products, no exceptions. We have covered a ton of ground today. We've journeyed all the way from the microscopic release of histamine, to HEPA filters, to pineapple enzymes, to the rigorous safety standards required for natural remedies. So I want to leave you with a rather provocative thought to chew on. Given the rising prevalence of allergies, the incredibly high clinical efficacy of targeted probiotic strains, and the undeniable connection of the gut-nose axis, could the future of allergy treatment shift entirely away from treating the nose and rely instead on healing the gut? It's a truly fascinating frontier in integrative medicine. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer today, and as always, stay curious.